Hi everyone, Sajil Qureshi here with another episode of RevOps 500, where we interview some of the world's greatest minds in the agency space. And today is no different. We have Amber Kemmis on. She has worked for many HubSpot elite partners. If anybody has ever heard of Amber from HubSpot, they're not talking about a HubSpotter. They're talking about Amber, Amber Kemmis. So, Amber, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sajil. My mom still thinks I work for HubSpot, but I don't. I've been in this ecosystem over 10 years. I've worked for multiple elite partners. Right now, I'm the director of revenue at growth operations firm. We are an elite partner, and I'm excited to talk a little bit more today about HubSpot mistakes. And people say I bleed orange. So
Well, let's get right into it, Amber. So, just in your own words, tell us a story. What is your biggest mistake that you can think of that you want to share with us?
choosing the biggest might be the one of the hardest things. Besides naming my four kids, luckily I had four, so I had lots of retries on naming them. But really, I've made this like similar mistake over the course of a decade, and I think we probably have all been there, and it's like crept in different ways. But the biggest mistake that I would say overall is basically not stopping and auditing what's happening with my HubSpot portal at least once a month. I'd argue, you go to the dentist every 6 months, right? Or some of us do, but a lot of people don't stop and say, okay, what's happening? What triggers? What automations? Is everything working like it should? The reality of RevOps is that we don't really have a check engine light. We have some check engine lights that happen, and we don't have like that comprehensive check engine light that if you're like me when it comes to cars, like have no idea if something's not working. And I need that check engine light. But in the HubSpot world and in RevOps, our tools and all those things, when they come together, don't always have that. And so taking a step back and looking at what's working or not working is really important. And I learned this lesson the hard way. This is probably 7, 8 years ago.
Okay.
I was working with one of the biggest medical manufacturing companies, and they had a support form on their website. And this is pre like HubSpot Service Hub. Like they didn't have the inbox and all these different tools that we have today. It was simply just like a website form where someone could check a box and say, I need help from support. And we had that form routed and notifying their support team, specifically an individual. Well, along the way, the client hadn't told us like that person's no longer with the company. We need to like reroute that process. Turns out there was like 6 months of them not getting their requests for support from their audience. And that was a pretty one, thank goodness this was like one of the most understanding clients of in the entire world. But secondly, it was like a wake up call of like, wow, I don't have a check engine light. I need to stop and check things every month, like double check that the right people are on
Wow.
forms, double check that this critical workflow for support, like my mind went to these people needed help and they weren't getting the help they needed from the company. Now, granted, they maybe went and found a phone number or something along the way, but it was like these people needed help with their product and they couldn't get it. So that is, and I've had those examples, but that have come up, and I've made that mistake. But like that was probably the most gravitating because of, one, the brand was huge, it was a really big brand, and two, it was like people needed help and they weren't able to get the help when they needed it.
So I have a million questions. The first one being, when did you realize that, wait a minute, like I mean, the reason why they're not getting support tickets is because not because our product is great. It's just that, we have the wrong person on the form, like or the wrong ID. When did you realize that?
Usually like when mistakes like that happens, it's like the customer is like screaming and saying, hey, I this is not routing correctly. We were just doing some updates to forms across the website, and we're like, okay, this one has this notification, and then we looked at like the activity history, and it was like 6 months of this not working. This person had left for 6 months, but we looked at the activity history and we're like, nobody's responding to these. Like, it doesn't seem like they're going anywhere. Like, it's submitted and then nothing. So we found it on our own, and it was 6 months of form submissions and a pretty decent high volume of them before we realized it.
And like, so 6 months go by, you notice there's nothing there, and after that, your learning is that you have to have a check engine like once a month. You go through a portal and you go through, see, make sure everything is like a health check. So what exactly is in a health check then? Like what are the things that you look for in a
Oh,
portal?
that's a great question. So I think it's one, you have to think about like, what are your business out, like how's the business using your rev technology? And that might be simply one platform like HubSpot, or it could be multiple. But I think one, always having a tech stack of like, here's all the tech we're using and here's the use cases for it. So if it's customer service, like in my terrible mistake, if it's customer service, you want to make sure that one, your forms, your email, support email, your any of your phone numbers are all like, check all of those, like any way there is to reach you, check it once a month and make sure that, pretend to be a customer and try to get help on via website chat, for example, and make sure not just that the tech is working, but the people on the other end are responding in an effective way. And then if we look at marketing, what's the goal with marketing? Is it to reach the right people for a specific product upsell, or is it specifically like you have always on nurturing happening with maybe your workflows, and it's going in and looking at one, HubSpot has in particular has some really great tools as it relates to workflow goals. So are people reaching the goal? And then what are some of those errors? Well, now workflows do tell you when something's broken, and you can get those notifications as you're going. But for the things you can't, maybe it's reviewing all of your emails and looking at the unsubscribe rate, the not send rate, like not bounce, because you might have an issue with new people coming into the database and then not getting opted in properly to receive those communications. And that sort of principle, I think, applies to, in the marketing world, SMS, ads, all the different ways that people can like you can communicate with them. And then sales is similar, and sales, I think, is similar to Service Hub in that, like, how can people get to you, and when they try to reach you, are they able to reply? Are they replying to emails? And it's not just like an audit of, is there something broken that shouldn't be broken, but it's also a good time to stop and look at, okay, if we're doing a lot of calling, if we're doing a lot of sequences and emails, how are they performing? Because if there's something broken in performance, then you might have an actual technical issue you need to fix, but you also might have like a strategy issue that you need to fix and address. And so getting very clear end to end of what are our tools, what are our business outcomes, and then what are the key things we're using to like get to those business outcomes, and trial and error and make sure that they're working at least like once a month.
I mean, that's a lot of work once a month across. I mean, you're in the agency, so you're doing this for how many portals are you doing this for? I mean, how do you guys manage all this like growth? I mean, like, is it like a thing operationally? I mean, how?
Yeah, I think there's two different sort of trains of thought. One, I'm a huge checklist fan. Like, there's a reason that pilots still use checklists before they take off every time. And I don't know the exact number of flights that take off out of some of our major airports, but there's a lot, right? And they go through that checklist every time, no matter what. Um, and obviously, the checklist for a small plane versus a commercial plane is going to be very different. So making sure that you're very clear of what is that checklist, and that's and literally a checklist, like, we need to check these forms, check that box. But then one thing I like to do is combine that. On HubSpot dashboards are great from a data perspective. You can see like a gap report. So if I see that, for example, contacts, like tracking your marketing contacts is one possible gap. If you see that there's a lot of contacts coming in and they're coming in as non-marketing, that can signal that you have a fix to do with your automation and how contacts are coming in and opting in and things like that. And that can be a report paired with a checklist right next to it. And so it's so simple, but like checklists combined with reports that quickly surface those things where possible. But the reality is you have to have the checklist because there are some things that maybe you can't show nicely in a report. HubSpot's gotten a lot better where you can do that almost with a lot of things, but when you can't, that having that clear checklist that you set up front and say these are the 5 things that are important to us, let's double check them every month.
I mean, that just seems like it seems something so simple, but I mean, I don't even like, even on our own portal, I don't think we have checklists like that where we just go through and say, okay, what's working, what's not working. I mean, there might be sales leads coming in that our team doesn't know about, maybe because of revenue. I mean, like, it's just kind of, it could be something like that. But I mean, you never had checklists before this issue came out with this big
Yeah.
brand and the support inquiry. You never had checklists before that time, or what?
No, that probably was,
Wow.
well, when we did, it's just like it probably wasn't the right things in the checklist. Like, I think one thing as partners we're really good at is having the checklist when we deploy it the first time, right?
Yeah.
We're,
Yeah.
like we're taking off out of the airport and we do that full thing, but then we land and we unlike a pilot aren't double checking before we take off again and doing those checks as we're flying. So like, I think as partners we have to be better about whether it's us doing it or us arming our customers with the things long after they leave us, is saying, hey, that checklist we ran when we took off the first time, let's revisit it every single month or every 2 months, depending on where that company is and how much they have in their portal. But it's stopping and literally put that time on your calendar, right? Like, don't let all the craziness of an agency world or even just a company, people always want to create new things. They always want to pump more into what they're already doing, but taking a step back to say, is what's the checklist look like for the things we already have running, and put it on your calendar, put it in your project management system, whatever it is. And if you start to see that like that task goes late 2-3 months in a row, you probably got some skeletons in your closet.
I'm just I can't first of all, I can't believe we're having this conversation because I've always known you as more of like an operations type of person, very much, in the details of those things, and to a lesser extent a marketing person, but more of an operations process driven type of thinker. And for you to tell me that, one, you made a mistake like that, I'm blown away. Second of all, that you didn't actually make checklists before that happened even, or like you had checklists but not like little league checklists. Let's not call them like major league checklists. If you
Yeah.
didn't have like the before that happened, I mean that's a pretty big thing to hear. I mean, it
Yeah.
just is.
And if you think, like, how often have you been in the situation where company makes a big change, like you have a client
Yeah.
and they make a big change, um maybe they have personnel changing out and you don't know about it, right? Like
Right.
nobody tells you, or in the speed of things we can be really bad at communicating. And so it's also like when you're building out those checklists, is to just be like, okay, what kinds of things change in this environment, in this company, that we can predictively check for in the future. Um, moving on from a company is one of them, but even just like change in strategy and business direction is another major one that like can cause you to have to revisit that initial checklist and like build it out even further.
Yeah, and that's something I kind of would say to the client was like, you got to know, right? If this person is no longer there, you got to know what they were in charge of and what was going to them. So you could always set up like a redirect of an email address or whatever, something like that. I mean, how could that have been missed? It just seems very basic.
Yeah, it does, but I think people are still struggling with like digital transformation, and
Hmm.
you know taking what is in someone's brain and like their day to day and making sure that they basically we have the win a lottery plan, right? So that I don't like to say get hit by a bus. That's
Yeah, yeah,
horrible.
yeah.
But if that person were to win the lottery, what how are we going to fill in their job role? And especially if somebody's been with a company a long time, there is a lot of IP that lives in a person's brain, and that we don't always like have those off boarding. Like they probably had an offboarding process for that person, but are they included in HubSpot notifications was not in that list.
No, 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 no,
Right?
no. Yeah.
So sitting down, I mean, if I think about how do you prevent that, sitting down with an individual and saying, hey, what are all the critical notifications you're receiving today, might be a good thing to do with any employee to make sure that when they do win the lottery, you've got a backup plan.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And like, I guess now you're talking 7, 8 years ago. So that's like 2017, 2018. I mean, like, this is before most companies of that size probably had like HubSpot admin or RevOps support internally anyways. So they would not necessarily, they rely a lot on the external agency for that or the partner at that time, probably.
Well, right, and the other point I think you made me think of is the tools are better now, right? You
Mm.
can, if with like the inbox tracking, like someone can send an email and you can see it sigil even if it's not going to your inbox, right?
Yeah.
So there's this built-in redundancy that starts to happen with better tools than we had 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit. So, you make this mistake and you know, obviously that what it does to you is it changes how you fundamentally do your work. Like, now all of a sudden you talk about checklists for everything as if you're like a pilot, which is pretty remarkable because yeah, I mean like, at least you're one of those people that people hear about and like when they do it's more like, okay, it's more about the operation side of the process, the system of doing things, your work with teamwork, all that kind of stuff, right?
Mhm.
Uh, what we don't hear about necessarily is like the steps that you take maybe to get to that point, like how that all comes to be. So that's you as an individual. We're like, okay, you make this mistake, and all of a sudden you get this light trigger goes off. Okay, I need checklists for everything. I need to be very very diligent on these very very critical things, and you do these checks on portals once a month, which becomes like a very very big thing because not everybody does that. Let's be
Mhm.
honest. And then on the other end of it, you talked about the tools are better. So let's talk about HubSpot itself, like the actual tool. How do you? I wonder if how many times do you think a mistake like that has happened where uh, a notification is just kind of going into an abyss or people don't know they don't have visibility on emails that are being sent until maybe that happens. I mean, like, was it like a couple of years ago maybe that you all of a sudden you could just see those things, you have visibility? Like take me through what do you think that thought process is?
Yeah, I think so. On the old way, the one of like in that example I've seen, and I use that example because I've seen other people make that mistake. Like
Oh,
um
really?
and not as severe as that one, but I've seen other people
Uh,
make the mistake like of, and this is like a lot in what we do a lot of times, like someone will come with to us with a HubSpot portal already, and we go in and we check, and it's like, hey, you're getting these submissions and nobody's being notified or like following up with
mm,
those leads. That's probably the most common one, is it's like people don't have that mechanism for the follow up. And the tools have gotten better in a way, in such like, for example, now you can, somebody requests a sales demo on your site, you can automatically create a lead record for that person. And now you have a pipeline of all the leads that haven't been followed up with, and make sure that whether it's me or another sales rep, like we've got that unifying view of who's following up with leads in an efficient way. So I think it's leaning less on those old tactics of like, hey, I'm going to put an email in in a form submission and make sure that that goes out to everyone. Now it's like, I'm going to make sure there's automation that
mhm.
also gives me the visibility and data on the other side to say what happened with these contacts who are filling out our forms.
Yeah, and like when you talk about that, it's so strange that to think of it now, like that wouldn't be there in the first place. But I guess there's so many And you say there's so many mess ups, I guess, that people have to finally make that like a feature request to get it done. Is that kind of accurate or?
Yeah, but also like Sajil, you work on websites a lot. How many
Yeah.
like how often like what's the max number of forms that you've put on a website before? Like and or
Oh,
seen on a website?
hundreds. Yeah,
Hundreds,
there's tons. Yeah, hundreds of them.
right.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're
Yeah.
relying on each of those to have like the proper email in them, one fixing that later on is a pain, but two, like if you're not thinking about it from a bigger picture, like and you are managing those, it's how easy is it to miss 2 out of 100 forms, right? If you don't have
Very easy.
the automation to support it, it'll fall through the cracks.
Oh, it happens all the time, right? And you know, sometimes I remember on a similar mistake that we have made is when we first started doing this stuff, probably, yeah, 11, 12 years ago inside of HubSpot. You know, just basic thing, right? Team members are building the site. They have their forms, they're testing. QC engineers just putting in the form, and it goes to like our internal email ID.
Mhm.
Site goes live. They don't change the email IDs, so the leads are going to like the QC engineers and stuff like that. And like, of course, they don't know why. They don't know how. And so, of course, then the marketing director calls up and says, "Mr. Gio, where are our leads? Since we launched the site, we have no leads anymore." I said, "Well, we talked to your marketing agency about that." That's actually what I said. But I mean, obviously, at the same time, it's because we didn't switch the form notification. And you know, like, and it's not that we ever done it before, but you know, this is your thing. So I mean, like, you know, it's your show. But I guess the point is, I guess now when you have checklists, that does help with those things, right? Where you know you do see, okay, every month go through, make sure these aren't happening, because sometimes if it hits the inbox, it's probably already too late, right? You're already missing a lot of those things that you could check out proactively versus reactively.
Yeah, and like timing is impeccable, is so critical. People expect like instant response, right? So waiting, sometimes maybe waiting a month if you have a high volume of tickets, or if you have a high volume of submissions, might be too long of a wait, because they want to be able to respond quickly. Uh, I don't, there's a lot of data that shows like the faster you respond, the more likely that like that's when that person's mind is in the mode of like fixing or buying or whatever it might be. So fixing it quickly is super critical. And I think companies that do better in this area of preventing it are those who have dashboards and have like clear KPIs, and they're reviewing on a weekly basis. Like, okay, last week we had 10 meetings and this week we only have 2. What's broken in the process that we can check against? And you go back to your checklist and you look at like, okay, is it might be that you like part of your funnel dried up because you stopped promoting on this channel or whatever, but it might be a fundamental automation issue that you need to fix.
Okay, so now let's talk about that. When you go through these checklists, and let's use the example you just made about lead count. So let's say you have 10 leads a week, and now all of a sudden you're at 2, and you see that. What is like what is your diagnostic? I mean, okay, so you see the symptom, the 8 less leads. What does Amber do next?
Yeah. There's things that I don't do the same as I did 7 or 8 years ago, but this is one thing I kind of do the same as. So one, like if based on the report, if it is a report where I can quickly see where's the source, right? Like why is it usually on organic, and now people are using chat gpt, so that's why I've dried up. But I also love to go and look at like the comparison of the actual journey. So clicking, it's so simple, but like clicking into a contact or a company record and like looking at that flow of what happened over the course of the last week in terms of activity before and after this impact can tell you a lot. It can tell you like, oh, they're not submitting the form, maybe because we added a silly pop-up that's covering up our form now. Like kind of walking yourself back through those journeys can reveal a lot in terms of what's working, not working. I this I shouldn't even, I'm going to share this example, but there was, I was reviewing the results of a campaign last week, and campaign was killing it. But then when I started to do this exercise of like actually going into a contact record, looking at their journey, I noticed an automation and an email that went out that this person shouldn't have got in their, it was like the wrong messaging. Not totally wrong. So it's like not something where I'd email them back and like apologies, but it was not the messaging that they should have got for that particular journey. And I found it by just like clicking onto a contact record. If I would have looked at the macro, I probably never would have caught that. I never would have saw that, hey, this thing over here and this thing over here are not quite they're not working together the way that they should. But that, hey, go dig into some of your records and look at what's happening in their journey is something that HubSpot's unique in, right? If you're working on a MailChimp and Sugar CRM or whatever, all these different tools that you can use, you can't see that one journey in one place. And so you're probably making some of these mistakes along the way, but you're not able to capture them in the same way that you can by like that one little hack of just following a journey and looking at those journeys and seeing like, is that part of, is last week's journey different from this week's journey?
Yeah, it's kind of like that concept of mystery shopping a little bit, or like undercover boss or undercover marketer in your case, right? Where you just go in and you become like this makeshift customer and you see what it feels like to go through and yeah, sign up for an event or or a webinar or buy something or whatever the case is, and that can uncover a lot of like broken pieces or things which are maybe hard, I guess. And is that kind of right? Or I mean, it sounds like
I love the show Undercover Boss. But I think it's exactly that. It's like taking a step back out of like what you do day to day. And maybe you're not the boss, but you still can be like taking a step back, looking at that typical journey that someone goes through and making sure that it makes sense. And this is like, okay, I'm a marketer, right? Yes, I have an ops background, but at heart, I'm a marketer. And I
right.
think, yeah, there's a technical aspect of solving in there, but there's also this just like, are you creating the journey that you want when you're the undercover boss, that show, like they go into their own company, they like work in the kitchen, for
Yep.
example, and they're like, are we actually creating the good food that I always thought we were creating? And if you go into the kitchen, if you go into your customer journey in our case and you're like, ooh, we're overcooking this part of it or whatever, you're I think walking through that helps you see like, am I maybe giving that person too many touch points? Am I not giving them the right message? I mean, to me, like customer first, put them at the center of every journey. And that undercover boss mentality and going back 100% does that. It tells you like, what does that experience in working with my brand look like?
Yeah, and like I guess where I'm trying to think of the best way to frame the question, Amber. So, you go undercover, you see this stuff, and what I mean, what do you do with it? Do you document it? Do you just fix it unilaterally? I mean, do you have to get buy-in from 5 different people? I mean, like, what next?
That's a great question. I'm gonna hopefully give a self plug here a little bit. I'm a huge fan of journey mapping. Like, what do we? And then that'll tell you the tech that you need. But huge fan of journey mapping. So like, I've created a journey mapping tool that you can use to basically take a step back and say, okay, if Sajil is just walking into our restaurant today, like what does he need when he walks in the door? Well, he needs a smile and a welcome. Like, and then you literally put this on paper, use ChatGPT, like map it out, and then you can inventory what is happening today against what you want to happen tomorrow, essentially. And maybe you can reuse some of the pieces you already have. Like if you have a bunch of emails going out and they fit that journey that you want to create, great, you can rework that. But if not, you might have to create some new things because you're not giving Sajil what he needs. Like I'm a huge fan of like talking to customers, understanding like truly what they need, and then using that data to basically say, are we giving them that experience in our tools?
I mean, you make it sound so simple. I mean, I mean, like I don't know, it just sounds so. I mean, look, I've seen you do this, so I mean, I know this is the core of what you do. But from the outside looking in, it just sounds so simple. Oh, just talk to the customer, see what they want. I mean, but sometimes even like our customers, they don't even know what they want. I mean, they don't even know like what their customers, why their customers buy from them. Even I mean, we're not marketers or programmers, but even then, like it still feels that way. Like they don't know what they want, what they're trying to say, and how do you like how do you deal with all that?
I think one, like open-ended conversations, and yeah, you are programmers, so like you work in a world, one of the hardest worlds I think to capture what somebody wants is when it comes to like the creative web design. People think they know
Okay,
what they want, but they never know how to communicate it. And I know this
that's
because
right.
I've been the person you sell to, and I've been like, it's been and then I've also served those customers. And I think there's this like concept of from and I now at the moment I can't think of the author, but there's this concept called question behind the question. And shout out to whoever that author is. But basically, when you ask somebody a question and the more direct you ask it, they're going to have a hard time conceptualizing it. So getting further into the why of like, hey, I want to have a sliding header. Okay, well, why do you want, like, using the five whys from Simon Sinek?
Mhm.
Why do you want? You usually can keep asking and get to the core of the objective, which is in that case, well, we have 10 products we want to show off, and we don't want to like limit ourselves on not showing off all 10 products in a header. So if you get to those points, those are the insights that you can like take and it's not one conversation, it's 5 to 7 conversations, and you take those and you put all of them, plug them into a chat GPT model, whatever you want to do. You can synthesize and usually find the common things that are a challenge for everybody. Um, right now, one of those common challenges often is like, I want to transform digitally and don't know how. But that might come out in, I want a new website, I want a new CRM tool, right? Like the how is a little bit different than the why. And so if you keep getting at the why, you can find those insights and use some great frameworks to like map them up against their journey.
So it's like hardcore business therapy sessions with with the with the people because they come to you and they might say, oh, I want a website, or if they come to growth, I want consulting or like help implementation support. But why do you want it? What do you need it for? Those sorts of questions, those more global thinking, globally, can you really get to the nitty gritty of the journey map and stuff like that? You can get them to articulate what they want in a better way, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. There's I Adele Ravella is one of my favorite authors as it comes to like
Yeah.
interviewing, and her interviewing technique is so simple that it's like, start by telling me about your journey when you started having this issue, this problem. And when people aren't asked directly what they want, like, and they're told to tell the story themselves, it comes out so much differently. But you have to ask questions and probe along the way to get all those nuggets that you need. So I think it's like not even maybe a little bit therapeutic in a way, if you want to describe it like that. But it really is like, tell me your story. Tell me, starting at the point when you started to have the conversation with HubSpot, for example, what did that look like? And people will still tell their story and you'll get better outcome versus if you're like, why did you choose to go with a new CRM? Like, you're going to get a different answer than if you say, tell me about why you started to think about a new CRM.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of thinking about it. And yeah, the question behind the question, I'll have to check it out myself. I don't know
I'll
the author. Or you stop me on that one. My books are a little bit more of the children's size, like when they got comic book bubbles coming out of them usually. But I mean, like it's an interesting one because you think that the more direct question, the better the answer, the more specific the answer. But what you're saying is that if you when it comes to like making a journey, if you keep the question a bit more open-ended storytelling, you actually get the more details you want to make those journey maps out.
Yeah. Have you, I mean, Sajil, when you go to order coffee and they ask you, unless you like have your go-to, but like you got a new menu, you're not at your typical Starbucks, and you go up and they ask what kind of coffee you want, how long, like, don't you feel the pressure? Don't Isn't it
Of
harder to
course.
like give your coffee order in those moments versus
If you
when,
know.
yeah, if you know. So like people just don't like to be put under, like, we have so many questions. Getting it right is like our what we're all about nowadays. So when you're like forced to answer something a specific way, it's a lot harder. Our brains have a harder time conceptualizing it than when it's like an open-ended, take me anywhere type of question.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, like, and it's funny that all of that kind of, I'm not saying all of it, but a lot of that has come from your experience with with the mistakes of like, yeah, keeping support notifications going to like to a black box
Yeah.
because like it just as it's from there it came operations Ember, I guess, in some way, the checklist person, the diligent one with the monthly check engine light in HubSpot. And then, now you're in the situation where now you can actually tell people what to look for and where to look for the symptoms of problems and those sorts of things. Just coming from like, I'm sure I'm dulling it down probably, but is it kind of like that? I mean, do you see that when you look back? Did you see it kind of as that part as like a tipping point at all, or no?
No, I stayed very RevOps focused, I guess. In this, what mistakes? I think my tipping points were probably more of the mistakes I made in life, career. Um,
Oh, all
Honestly,
right.
which I know we're not getting into today, but I do think that it was like a series of things. Like that might have. I care so much about the customer being happy, being a great partner. And then, so when you make a mistake like that, or you make another mistake like that, like a few weeks later, and they all have different levels of gravity. But when you make a few of those, you're kind of like, I don't ever want to go through that experience again. How can I prevent that and get better every single day? And 10 plus years later, I think I'm a lot better than I was probably at that point. The tools are better, which is one a problem in that now you have more to like consider, but also make some of the elements easier. And I think it wasn't like that one moment. It was like a series of moments of making sure that my goal is like never have to deal with a unhappy customer, or like being one step ahead of them. Journey, mapping out journeys effectively is one way to prevent that. But it's also learning from your mistakes and putting together those learnings in a way that you now have a checklist, so that in the future you're a better person than you were yesterday.
Yeah, and like I guess the diligence comes from that, but I mean, I'm sure diligence gives you that, you want to make sure every customer is happy. Of course, I'm sure in the last 7, 8 years you might have had maybe half of a unhappy customer, probably given your amazing track record, probably had like maybe one unhappy customer at the most. But I mean, the point I'm trying to make is they don't ever go away, right? I mean, you will inevitably have an unhappy customer, but you still have your checklist, which makes it a maybe it's less unhappy customers because of the checklist, something like that.
Yeah, and I think in like early stages of like proving your value to a customer, it also gives them reassurance. Like people love to know that you have a process, that you have a proven method for working effectively. And so those things like kind of mitigate concern that can happen along in the buying process, or even when you're first in that honeymoon phase of working with a partner. But I think it also is to your point, it creates a world where it's happening 1 out of 10 times, not 7 out of 10 times.
Hmm. Okay, so while I have you, like let's go under the hood a little bit further. So you've got, like I said, you've worked for a lot of different types of HubSpot shops out there. What is one common mistake you see in all of them,
Oh,
if there's any?
wow, Sajil, thanks for giving me a heads up on this question. Kidding.
Just came up. So
You didn't even know it's coming. I would
no.
say this is so common. It's to get super focused on the technical requirements and the questions that people are asking us, like, hey, how can I, I like a customer might come to you and say, like, I want to be able to separate two contact records in this way because of blah 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 blah. And it's getting good about, like, what's your ideal outcome here, like what is the
Mm,
business objective that we're doing this for, because it often comes in a very tactical request. And a common mistake is that you'll look at that request as a tactical request and respond to it just as a tactical request, versus going back to the question behind the question. It's like, what is the ideal outcome here? Because it might have not be solved in that tactical way they asked about at all. Like, it might be removing a limitation that they're inviting into it by, like, simply being embracing change. Like, you have to be able to understand the larger picture and find a solution that could be totally unmarried to the solution that they are coming to you with. And it's pretty
mm.
common to, like, almost like act like a support engineer, in a way of, like, I'm going to directly respond versus indirectly help that request.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of like it sounds like what you're saying is that these clients come to, like, partners of, great stature, and they say, I have this problem, I need you to do this for me. Whereas they don't look at you guys as, or maybe what happens, maybe it's a strategist or someone at the partner side who doesn't maybe think of it like a doctor and say, okay, well, why do you want that prescription? Why do you want that medication or that operation or that surgery? And they say, okay, no problem, let's get you under the knife, and we'll just,
Exactly.
crack open your brain.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Versus,
interesting.
like,
Interesting.
hey, why don't you start exercising before you think about liposuction, right? Um,
Right.
uh,
Great example.
yeah.
Thank you. I didn't say you did. That's perfect.
I know it's the best way when I could think of that. But it is, like, there sometimes it might be that you have to put in, like, change something fundamental in your business that's, like, keeping you from the bigger outcome that you're trying to get to. And it's not anybody's fault. It's not the customer coming to you often doesn't know HubSpot well enough to see, like, oh, there's another angle here that you could be taking. And then on the practitioner side and on the consultant side, we get a lot of those requests every day, right? So it's like taking a step back sometimes, like, to versus going forward, like solving and continuing to knock out those things out, it can be a challenge just with time.
Yeah, it also even it's also could be consultative selling, right? Because you're opening up different opportunities for growth for the partner, or like for things that they're maybe not thinking about,
Mhm.
stuff like that. They just come to you with the symptoms, they fix it, but they don't you don't know what that symptom could mean and what it means, what it could mean down the road or anything,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So rather, it can kind of be, it can be a pain, right? Like, in that moment when you ask more questions before actually giving an answer, the customer might be like, well, I just want my thing solved. But
Yeah.
it is often worth it because it can sometimes create those, like, really transformative moments for the business.
That's so interesting, Camber, because I always thought that we were like the job shops, the programmers, right? People just come to us and say, okay, here's what I want you to do, just code it. And we typically, I would always think relative to a partner, we would ask very few questions because I figured you guys have done all the real brain work, the strategy. Okay, why do you want this thing built? Why do you need this integration done? Why do you want this website to look the way it does? And when it comes to us, we're just kind of like, editing a movie that's already been written by a Hollywood director or something. But it's so interesting to hear coming from your side of the chair that you're actually saying that a mistake that partners make is they become uh, they become like a order takers in their own way sometimes, and not necessarily thinking about why and how. That is not something I was prepared to hear.
Well, and I just like everything, it's on a spectrum, right? So
Sure.
it doesn't happen 100% of the time. And there's some really great consultants out there who are constantly taking a step back and saying, um, like, what's the bigger thing happening here? But I think the nature of our business is we are incentivized to drive more value faster, do things faster. We balance a lot of tools and technology and clients. And so it's easy to like fall into that slump of like, let me solve this quick and not really stop and smell the roses.
But I mean, look, I know we're almost at time, and I just wanted to say thank you for coming on. It was really interesting to have this conversation with you. I know, we've talked a lot, but it's just usually very, very casual. It's not so much in the depths of like where did Amber actually, kind of fall apart somewhere or something like that. And like, not that, like, making a
Yeah.
website error like that is falling apart, but kind of. I mean, in some ways, if they're not getting support tickets for months and they feel, oh, the product is great, somebody probably got a raise on your mistake, which is good. So I mean, I mean, like it was just interesting to hear you kind of go through those things and how it helps shape maybe how you say that everybody in a HubSpot portal should have a check engine light, and understanding how partners also make these different sorts of mistakes, the journeying, stuff like that. It was really interesting to hear like these different sorts of angles to how you've have become the person that you are. Really interesting. I
Thank
appreciate you coming on. Oh shoot.
Thanks, Jill. Yeah, I think I love the whole angle of your podcast because the reality is that mistakes happen and like not enough people talk about those mistakes. They almost like brush over them, act like we're all perfect, and we're not. That is one mistake I've made in 8 years, but I don't even think there'd be a spreadsheet large enough to consume all the mistakes that I've made. So I appreciate you like bringing them to the surface and allowing the space for somebody to talk about them.
Thanks for that, Amber, and anybody listening, all 7.5 of you out there. If you liked it, please give us a shout. Tag Amber. Amber, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Growth while we still have you?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier, I'm the director of revenue. That means that I get to oversee both marketing and sales. So I can't have an argument with myself about like, hey, the leads marketing is sending aren't great and vice versa. We're one team. And so right now I'm super excited about really using a lot of HubSpot's newer enterprise tools like Journey Analytics, their AI lead scoring. We're basically our own. We're doing the best work we possibly can for ourselves to help other people in the HubSpot ecosystem see what is possible when you use the best of these tools. And so we're doing it and using them for ourselves to help others see what's possible. And you'll get to hear a lot more about what that looks like and some of the tools and resources that come out of it you'll see online. So follow me on LinkedIn. It's slash Amber Kemmis. Really easy to find. There's only one of me in the world, I think. Thank you to my husband for marrying me and giving me a very unique last name. But you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'll be sharing a lot of stuff about how basically you can use what's possible in HubSpot for yourselves.
Look forward to it. Amber, thanks again for coming on, and see everybody next time.
Thanks, Studio.
Bye.